Welcome back to another video. Today we are ranking the liesofp bosses from easiest to hardest. I have poured countless hours into this FromSoft adjacent game and I absolutely love it so far. This ranking is based on a first playthrough and not a New Game Plus, which means that at what point in the game the fight occurs is taken into consideration. This ranking is also based on not using a Specter Summon. Without further ado, let's get right into the list. At spot number 16, we have the Corrupted Parade Master. After Hotel Krat has been attacked, the Corrupted Parade Master blocks the entrance to the hotel. This is the corrupted version of the very first boss in the game. The corruption basically means that the boss is now able to spread decay. This ought to make the fight harder than the first encounter, right? Well, the fact that this fight takes place quite late in the game, when you are both more experienced and better equipped, makes it easier in my opinion. For example, at this point in the game you have access to the grindstone, and this boss gets absolutely melted by fire. And you can also use the Aegis Legion arm, which makes the fight even easier. All this considered, the Corrupted Parade Master earns the crown as the easiest boss in all of liesofp. Moving on to number 15, we have the Door Guardian. This gigantic monster guards the entrance to the Arch Abbey, the very last section of the game. The fight might be confusing at first as your normal attacks do very little damage. But once you figure out that the boss will open itself up to a fatal attack that does ridiculous amounts of damage, if you just keep hitting him in the left leg, the fight becomes quite a breeze. His attacks are extremely well telegraphed and are easily dodged. The only real issue with this fight is the shock states effect that is applied when you do get hit by his attacks. This effect makes your stamina recover much slower and can lead to your demise. But all in all, Door Guardian proposes little to no challenge at all. At spot number 14, we have the Parade Master. Being the very first boss you encounter in the game, the Parade Master can be somewhat challenging to new players just due to its chronological placement. His attacks are fairly well telegraphed and can be both guarded and dodged effectively. His health pool is not massive either, so the fight doesn't last for too long. I think the Parade Master is a well-balanced introductory boss that gives the players some ideas of what to expect going forward. Moving on to number 13, we have the Scrapped Watchman. This makes sense chronologically, since the Scrapped Watchman is the next major boss fight after the Parade Master. I think this is a step up in difficulty from the Parade Master. He has some delayed attacks that can be hard to read, and he adds some electricity to the ground on some of his attacks in the second phase, which becomes another thing to take into account when dodging or guarding. He also has a grab attack that can be tricky to time at first, but the attack where he winds up is very easy to read and get a perfect guard on. All in all, a really good fight that can pose some challenges early in the game. At number 12, we have the Stalkers. I do not feel like ranking them individually as they are more or less the same fight. Quick human enemies that are easily staggered and backstabbed with somewhat difficult guard timings. I think I struggle more than most people do on these enemies. I'm not very good with perfect guards, and some of these Stalkers have really good tracking, so you can get punished trying to dodge them. But most of the time it's very efficient to dodge and backstab them when they go for their attack combos, which substantially lowers the difficulty of these fights. Next up at spot number 11, we have the Walker of Illusions. This fight is not too different from the Stalker fights in its characteristics, but it definitely warrants a separate ranking. This boss too has some long, quick-hitting combos that can be hard to perfect guard, and it spawns an illusion halfway through the fight, which can be intimidating at first, but the illusion is killed off quite easily. I found myself having quite some trouble dealing with the combos, but the boss doesn't have that much health, so the fight does not last too long, which is why this boss just missed out on the top 10. Cracking the top 10 is King's Flame Fuoko. Fuoko is another early game boss that is fairly easy, but he has some annoying and difficult features as well. His attack, where he covers the ground in fire, can be really deadly if you're not running far away or standing behind a pillar. It applies the overheat status effect and quickly drains your health. Other than this attack, the fight is fairly straightforward. His Fury attack charge has little to no tracking and can be easily avoided and punished. It's also quite easy to time the perfect guard on it. Moving on to number 9, we have the fallen Archbishop Andreas. Now we're into a new tier of difficulty. All the following bosses gave me trouble to some extent, starting with the fallen Archbishop Andreas at the end of chapter 4. This is the first real two-phase fight in the game, and most of the difficulty lies in the second phase. The first phase has some quirks as well. I absolutely despise the decay status effect in this game. Not only does it drain your health, albeit rather slowly, but it drains your weapon durability quickly. So you'll have to manage that in addition to your health, which can be stressful in the middle of a boss fight. The Archbishop's tongue whip causes this status effect, and for some reason I find it quite hard to react to, even though it has some wind up. One thing that makes this fight a lot easier is using fire. Fire absolutely melts his health and shortens the fight a lot. In the second phase, you essentially have two different bosses, one on each side of the body, which is really cool. The side that has the bishop is much harder in my opinion, while the other side is basically the same fight as the first phase, so I try to get around to that side as quickly as possible in the second phase. Overall, I think this fight is fantastic and well balanced at this point in the game. At spot number 8, we have the eldest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. I'm usually against gang fights in these types of games, but I think both of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood fights are made quite well. The eldest summons his siblings when he reaches certain health thresholds, and whenever he summons a sibling, I like to eliminate him or her as fast as possible so I can continue the fight one-on-one. If you choose to ignore his siblings, the fight can become quite chaotic when all three are summoned. The eldest has rangy and heavy attacks that deal a lot of damage and can be very punishing. It kind of sucks when you get hit by one of those attacks while fighting the sibling, even though that's quite rare. Overall, a potentially hectic gang fight, but with clear opportunities for one-on-ones that makes the fight bearable and somewhat enjoyable. Moving on to number 7, we have Champion Victor. This fight is an all-out brawl. Victor is aggressive and tries to punch the soul, or should I call it ergo, out of you. Most of his attacks are fairly easy to dodge, but his fury attacks are not trivial to perfect guard. His combo where he punches you 4 or 5 times in a row, alternating between normal attacks and fury attacks, can be really deadly if you dodge the first attack, which I did a lot. It also feels like his health pool is quite large, which makes the fight a bit harder. Overall, I did quite enjoy this fight, especially when I started dodging instead of trying to perfect guard everything. Yeah, I know, I need to get good. Anyways, at number 6, we have the second Black Rabbit Brotherhood fight. This one might be a bit surprising to some of you. I struggled immensely with this fight on my first playthrough. It's basically 3 mini-bosses and a full-fledged boss packed into one fight. The fight takes forever, it feels like, and you have to manage status effects, health, and weapon durability. The siblings themselves are not that difficult, and they do fight you one-on-one for the most part, but sometimes you get interrupted and get puppet stringed, allowing for the aggroed sibling to combo you and add annoying status effects, breaking all the momentum of the fight and forcing you to reset. And even if you get through the first phase and manage everything correctly, meaning that the last sibling should have as little health as possible when the eldest is summoned, you still have an entire boss fight ahead of you with an aggressive back from the dead brother wanting to drain the little health you still have left from fighting his siblings. Luckily, the eldest health pool is quite small, and thank God for that. Just making the top 5 is Simon Manus, Arm of God. This is somewhat of a disappointing last boss, or second to last depending on the ending when it comes to difficulty. I did not play liesofp at launch, so I have not experienced pre-nerf Simon, so I can only talk about the current version. The first phase is very easy. The attacks are predictable and easy to guard or dodge, and his health pool is manageable. The second phase is really tough though. It feels super hectic with a lot of things going on at the same time. Arrows of disruption from the sky, Simon's melee attacks, and large AoE attacks can all hit you basically at once and do quite a lot of damage. So I'm not saying that this fight is easy by no means, but compared to the bosses that are still left to be mentioned, I found this to be a tier down in difficulty. At number 4, we have the King of Puppets. The fact that this boss is basically at the midpoint of the game is insane. This could very well have been one of the last bosses in the entire game. It has 2 distinct phases with 2 completely different types of fights. The first one is a normal big monster fight. The first phase basically has 2 phases as well, where the first one is really simple and easy, and the second one becomes a lot harder when he starts using his super long arms to his advantage with quick attacks that are hard to read. When you've completed this fight, the first phase, which could have been easily a standalone boss if it had a bit more health, the real fight begins when Romeo emerges, a human enemy with quick attacks and devastating combos. This part of the fight is really difficult and could also easily have been a standalone boss fight. His long combo where he puts fire on his blade is ridiculously hard to guard, and I always resort to trying to dodge it, which killed me many times. All in all, this is a fantastic boss fight with incredible difficulty at a fairly early point of your liesofp journey. Moving on to number 3, we have the Green Monster of the Swamp. This boss was a really hard sticking point on my first playthrough. I'm not exactly sure why I found this boss so difficult. I think it's much easier on New Game Plus and beyond, especially if you have the Nameless Puppet Amulet, which grants you immunity to normal status ailments. Since decay is a huge part of this fight, being immune to it removes some of the difficulty. Also, this boss drops my favorite weapon in the game, the 2-Dragon Sword, so not having it when facing the boss on the first playthrough makes it more difficult as well. When I look back at the fight now, I have a hard time figuring out why I struggled so immensely on this fight. The second phase is somewhat erratic, but it reuses some of the scrapped Watchman's moveset with a lot of easy perfect guards. I think the duration of the fight might have something to do with it. On my first playthrough, I was really inconsistent with dodges and guards. That in combination with the decay status effect made this a very difficult fight for me. At spot number 2 we have Laasia, the complete. This boss is probably number 1 on a lot of lists, and rightfully so. Laasia and Nameless Puppet are by far the most difficult bosses in the game in my opinion, a tier above everyone else. Her combo with like 14 consecutive hits in the first phase is really fun to try and perfect guard, but one mistake in that attack chain can cost you your life. Other than that, the first phase is relatively manageable. That second phase though, it's really hard. The way she teleports around gives her attack really weird timing. Her combos are not as long in the second phase, but they are very deceptive. And the lightning bolts from the air adds another dimension to her moveset that you have to account for as well. All in all, this is a fantastic late game fight that brings both difficulty and spectacle to the table. And at spot number 1, the most difficult boss on my first playthrough is none other than the Nameless Puppet. I literally thought I was going to give up on the game when I reached this boss. Once I got good enough to consistently beat the first phase, which to be fair is relatively simple, I got absolutely obliterated by the second phase. There are a plethora of combos with different timing, very little time for punishing and healing, and a fury attack that's impossible to react to and just have to be memorized. This is a boss where people who are good at perfect guarding will have a breeze, but for some reason I have had very hard time mastering the perfect guard timing in this game. My over 100 hours in Sekiro did not really help me in this game, unfortunately. And dodging the Nameless Puppet can be a deadly endeavor as well, so I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I just had to brute force the fight, exhausting all throwables, healing items, and Legion arms. Alright, that's the end of my list. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I know you'll disagree with me, so just tell me why I'm wrong in the comments, and I will see you all in the next one.